Welcome to Petrichor on the Rocks, I'm Mason. In my previous video, the Adam and Eve cycle, how our society will collapse, link in the description, we walked through Genesis 2 and 3 line by line and discovered that it was talking about our society right here and now. But if you made it through that lengthy video, you might have noticed that it portrays a grim ending and a certainty to fall that we are helpless to do anything about. That's true. But don't despair, because in this video, we will continue on through Genesis 4 and 5 and see how it continues the cycle forwards, but this time it gives us warnings on how a good person should act in each section of the cycle, serving as a sort of survival guide for any place a society finds itself along the Adam and Eve cycle. The section covered in this video will be the wilderness, just after the collapse of the previous society, and then continuing on as the society moves out of the wilderness and into the garden once more. We begin where the last video left off, just after Adam and Eve were kicked out of the garden and entered the wilderness stage once more. Now Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, "I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord." And again she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground. These are the first true denizens of the wilderness, men who have never dwelt in the garden, born into strife and struggle within the ruins of the collapsed society that came before them, and notice that there are two of them, one who keeps animals and another who grows from the ground. From our Genesis 1 definitions, we can see what each of these means. Abel tends to animals, and animals are urges. Thus Abel is reacting to this broken world by trying to properly order his urges. He is doing what Adam did before, naming the animals. But Cain is tending to the ground. In other words, he's growing plants. In our Genesis 1 definitions, we can see that the plants are people, specifically strangers. So Cain is trying to order and grow strangers. Why? Because the garden was made up of plants, and thus the lost society was made up of strangers. Cain is trying to bring everyone back together into the unity that was lost in the garden. But Abel is simply trying to organize the urges inside himself first. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. We can see which of these two strategies worked. Cain was trying to reclaim the garden. That was his goal. He just wanted to take all these strangers and properly organize them back into a functional society again. But Abel just wanted to get his ducks in a row, or in this case, sheep. He wanted to continue the cycle in light of the urges he saw inside himself and their consequences, and reorganize those human urges that produced society in the first place. In this way, we can see that Abel wanted to press forward through the wilderness and find God's purpose again, but Cain wanted to skip ahead and get right back to the good times. Recall the two categories of trees in the garden. There are those you like because they give you something, which are the trees attractive to the sight and the trees who bore fruit. And there are the special trees, which are the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Cain is only interacting with the first two trees. He is trying to organize society back together using the methods of trade and exchange. Everyone has desires, and so he is trying to get all of those desires to meet and interact in a way that creates a deal. If one person has too much food and another has too much wood, then they can exchange the fruit that is food for the fruit that is wood, so everyone has some. If someone finds a person attractive, then they can pay them to continue singing, dancing, or whatever attractive thing they were doing. This is equal and fair exchange. Thus, Cain is working to till the soil and bring from it his own little garden, held together by exchange. But Abel is focused on the other two trees. Abel is not trying to organize the people into what they can exchange, but rather is staying focused on the urges themselves, keeping the good urges that build up a society and rejecting the evil urges that break down a society. After all, it may be perfectly fair exchange that a man pays money for alcohol or to gamble or on easy women, but just because an exchange of fruit has been made does not mean that the urges that were satisfied were good. Those urges of lust and greed and gluttony are those of the goat, the toad, and the pig, respectively. Such urges will break down society over time. The only goal of a person who has made themselves a tree of life is to be as a caretaking shepherd over the sheep that are their beloved people, and to whom their own urges are bent and sacrificed. Cain's method is to simply use those urges in whatever way possible to get people to live together, even as strangers. But Abel's method is to get people to become aware of those urges and to rekindle the tree of life, which treats people not merely as trees, which are strangers, but as actual human beings who are cared about with only the good and clean animal urges that would build them up. These are the urges of self-sacrifice, because, after all, if you hold back an urge you want, then you have caused that urge to die. If you want to eat food, but there is a starving person nearby, then it means you suffer going hungry in order to instead care for that other person and give them your food. That makes you a tree of life. In order to be a tree of life, you must put your urges second, and without a tree of life in its midst, there can be no garden, and thus no society. And that is what we see. God had no regard for Cain's offering because it lacked the tree of life. Only Abel's method could rekindle that self-sacrificial tree which was required for any society to build up. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. The Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? And why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it." God warns Cain of why he is failing. Sin is crouching at the door, like the animal urge that it is. If you try and bind people together through their pleasure and with mere bread and circus, then they will fall readily into those sins, and it will prevent the growing of the tree of life. You can't get the garden back that way. What you get will be something like a Mexican standoff that spans the whole of a group. A den of thieves or pirates who would kill his mate for a bag of pennies or a piece of 8. Cain is thus warned that he must overcome these lower urges and bind people in shared brotherhood and love with the tree of life if he wants to regain the true nakedness and paradise in the garden. Because, as God warns, the path Cain is going down is contrary to him. It is not really his goal to create a society there in the wilderness, but rather to regain the garden itself. But his method will fail. Cain spoke to Abel, his brother, and when the two were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said, "Where is Abel your brother?" And he said, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" Cain made his choice. Rather than properly tending to the animals, which are urges, and trying to rekindle the tree of life upon which a real paradise society might be built, instead he saw that Abel's attempts to get the people to focus on their own urges was contrary to Cain's method. When people focus on not their own urges, but rather how to care about other people, they are inherently rejecting the pull of the flesh. You can't bribe a man with money who doesn't care about wealth. You can't tempt a man with food and women who has tamed his belly and who does not lust because of his virtue. By convincing people to hold back their urges, Abel has ruined Cain's ability to gain control through exchange. The devil's bargain fails to tempt the man who wants nothing for himself. So Cain removes the problem. Notice that he rejects the tree of life in his very words. He says, "Am I my brother's keeper?" He has cast off the burden of caring about his own brother. He does not love his brother, and thus he has denied becoming a tree of life and gifting his brother life. Those whom you do not gift life and do not consider real people in your mind, you have cut off from yourself, and thus you have killed. That is the nature of all societies who find themselves in the wilderness. They cannot return to the garden because they reject the tree of life, and any who come with the words to tame their urges are killed. How many prophets, saints, and martyrs suffered this fate, being removed simply because they threatened the power inherent to the exchange of fruit? That is also the very reason that Christ himself was killed upon the cross. And the Lord said, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground, and now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth." Cain has removed the thing that was building up the tree of life. He removed the organizing of the animals and thus the urges of those in the group. Without the ability to distinguish good urge from bad, all urges become permissible. And who can live there? If a merchant wants to sell his goods, he can only do so while there are more customers than there are thieves. But if his customers steal more than they pay for, then he loses profits, and how can his business continue? It will die. Then there will be nothing left to buy nor to steal. There must be a minimum named animals to name stealing as wrong if the merchant is to sell what he has. But the moment the effort to hold back the urge to steal is gone, then so too is the merchant, which means the ground which once rendered up its fruits has now left. The merchant will no longer sell his fruits in the criminal town, and cursed are those who stole from him and drove him out of business. And once a merchant is driven out of business, then the others will follow. They will be on guard to the thieves, and even before they steal, the merchants will refuse to sell to them. In order for thieves to even exist as a group, there must at least be honor among thieves, or else everything breaks down utterly. Any who denies themselves no animal urge will find no stranger who will even barter with them. The trust is utterly gone. Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, you have driven me today away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." Then the Lord said to him, "Not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold." And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest anyone who found him should attack him. And then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Once all trust has been destroyed, there's only regret. Once you stab your neighbor in the back, steal from your trusted brothers, and tell every lie that you thought would benefit you, then trust runs dry. Everyone becomes wise to your games. Every tree around you bears its thorns at you. But Cain is given a protective mark. This is the example he serves as. Anyone who destroys all trust in those around them and are seen for it inherently prove that the breaking down of trust leads to destruction. Anyone who witnesses someone who has sinned like Cain will see that to strike that person down only serves to perpetuate the cycle of violence and deception, thus adding to the problem rather than improving it. The key is the sevenfold punishment on any who kill Cain. This is a callback to day 7, and what happened on day 7? As my video, Genesis 1 is about you, outlines, it was the point at which you become aware of your choice to care about others or to care about yourself. If you choose to care about yourself, then you will kill Cain for being a problem, but that will put distance between you and all trees that aren't useful to you. That's the same path Cain walked down. Instead, you should see the warning from what Cain has suffered and choose to care about him anyway, thus making yourself a tree of life and doing as Abel did. By killing Cain, you join Cain. and you thereby kill Abel. But because Cain is an obvious warning in the very way he was destroyed in his life, it means anyone who can see Cain's sin is able to see it by the contrast of having made it to day 7 and known what it meant to work for the tree of life. Thus, if you kill Cain, you have cut yourself off from what you learned on day 7, and you have lost 7 times more than what Cain lost, because Cain had no example in the first place, due to him being the firstborn into the wilderness. But you have him as an example, and therefore you have more to lose. Notice also that Cain then goes east. That is progress toward the garden once more. Eden is always in the east, and now that Cain has proven definitively that a society cannot form without a tree of life growing in it, Cain can finally move in the right direction, even if it's only as a symbol of what not to do. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. When he built a city, he called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. To Enoch was born Irad, and Irad fathered Mahujal, and Mahujal fathered Methusael, and Methusael fathered Lamech. And Lamech took 2 wives. The name of one was Adah, and the name of the other Zillah. Adah bore Jabal. He was the father of those who dwelt in tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who play the lyre and pipe. Zillah also bore Tubal-Cain. He was the forger of all instruments of bronze and iron. The sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. Cain's sin is that he tried to start his own city using his own method of working the ground to get back to the garden. Thus, he names the city after his son Enoch in order to found a new beginning, which is one and the same as him trying to start his own creation, mirroring Genesis 1, which leads to the garden. And so we see the fruits of that progress. From Cain, who is the warning not to sacrifice those who are trying to name animals, came the city, the first real cohesion. The city was both Cain's son, Enoch, and the city itself, which was safe from breakdown after the warning Cain served as. And notice that it has 6 generations that we see. These 6 are the slowly rebuilding back of trust and understanding, just enough to return to the proper 7th-day mindset of a need to form the tree of life by organizing animal urges, which Abel already preserved but was killed for doing. It is a restarting of the days of creation. We can see the similarities of how Cain's face fell and how the serpent crawled on its belly, how the serpent was cursed, and so was Cain, and thus the line of Cain is doomed from the start. It progresses, but because it didn't continue God's creation, but rather tried to start everything anew, it has a curse and a rebellious line, a mistake many societies that find themselves in the wilderness make. Rather than going through the wilderness, they try to get back to the garden by simply starting the process right back up where the garden left off. So focused on how to get the garden they want, they lose all sight of why the garden exists at all and what they should be doing in it. It starts with Cain, who is the example and the rule not to destroy all trust. Then came the city called Enoch, which could be formed now that some trust was built on that simple warning that could reach even the most self-serving people. The most base law of, you don't bite the hand that feeds you. Then we see Irad, Mahujal, Methusael, and Lamech. This takes us up the 7 days of creation to 5 as the society moves out of the chaos of the wilderness and the failure of Cain to simply dominate all things and into a more functional reformation of how a group of people can live and work together, till we finally reach day 6 with the generations of Jabal, Jubal, and Tubal-Cain, which are the emergence of more than just survival. They are living in tents and tending livestock. They are musical instruments, and they are metal working. If we line these up with the days of creation, we see on day 1 we get Enoch, which is the splitting of light and dark, which means that the society now defines itself. Thus, it is a city. It goes from scattered people surviving to a group that identifies as itself. On day 2, we see Irad, waters above splitting from the waters below, which means the city is struggling for survival. The group delves into simple tasks and building base infrastructure. On day 3, we see Mahujal. The water below splits from the land and then plants form, which means the people have gained stability. The group reaches a safe and stable living situation and forms social norms. On day 4, we see Methusael. Water above splits from the celestial bodies, which means that the group has agreed on their shared goals and values. The group has extra time to consider what they want their future to look like, and so they plan together. Day 5, we see Lamech. Birds split from fish, which means that the people have formed into specializations of various types. The group starts specializing and aiming at various goals that serve the group as a whole. Day 6, we see Jabal, Jubal, and Tubal-Cain. That's the split between men and beasts, which means the society has finally arrived back at the point Abel was to begin with. Now we see the emergence of livestock once more, which is the ordering of animals in Jabal. We also see that he is the father of those who dwell in tents. Tents are temporary living places, which are in contrast to permanent houses, and so Jabal is not just organizing the animals, but he is the one who is not putting down roots, but rather considers this place to be a transition to something higher. He has a proper vision of the Garden of Paradise. He is the spiritual priest of the society. He has figured out that in order to return to the Garden of Paradise, you must organize your animals and not live where you are as though you were going to stay there. But being the line of Cain, his attempt to get there is corrupted by material concerns. And then there is Jubal, who is the father of those who play the lyre and the pipe, meaning he is the beginning of the society's celebration of that which is transcendent. He is trying to create beauty in the world. Thus, Jubal is the emergence of the artist. And we see Tubal-Cain, who creates instruments of bronze and iron. He is focused on the material world. He is the emergence of the technology maker. Together, they form the 3 higher rungs of a society in development: the priest class, the artist class, and the technology class. These are the 3 splits within a society that is still trying to develop ways to get back to the Garden of Paradise. Now we see, through time, the society is healing and beginning to reform. But despite all that progress, all it has done is manage to create complicated methods that attempt to materially reach that which Abel was already building from the very start. The meaning of the root of their names gives us a hint of what they are trying to do. Jabal, Jubal, and Tubal-Cain all come from the root Yabal, which means to carry along. And so each of them is carrying a method along into the society and trying to use it to reach Cain's initial goal. But notice that the 3 come from 2 different mothers, Adah and Zillah. Adah means adornment, while Zillah means shadow. Thus, Adah's 2 sons, Jabal and Jubal, went on to try to reform the priesthood and the artistry, which adorns the society with a higher purpose and tries to carry on what Abel was doing from the start, but instead of looking inward to organize the animals, it's simply a creation of methods that mimic the outcome of what Abel was doing. But it's too little too late, and what emerges out of the efforts is a method that is tainted with the godless focus of the line of Cain. Jabal proclaims, "We will figure out what is good on our own and become a moral authority unto ourselves." And Jubal says, "We will have beauty and perfection, but made with our own hands." The eyes of Jabal and Jubal are clear enough for them to see what is lacking in Cain's earlier method, but they are too deep in those methods to properly fix it now. Their rebellion against Cain's methods and attempts to become as priests and as artists does little more than create a mockery of the true line of Abel, further obscuring and confusing what is good. Whereas Zillah's son, Tubal-Cain, created things out of the earth of bronze and iron, which is to carry along the focus and methods of earthly creations, and thus to carry on the will of Cain, which is why Tubal-Cain means the continuation of Cain. Here we see a splitting of the line at the end, separated into two different wives. The line that splits off to return to Abel's original aim but corrupts it because of the use of method, and the line that continues on with the original aim of Cain. We also see that along with the continuation of the line of Cain by Tubal-Cain, there is a sister named Naamah. Naamah means to be attractive and is paired with Tubal-Cain as another callback to the pairing of Adam and Eve, which is yet another attempt to restart the garden through the use of human methods, those being the technology of Tubal-Cain and the attempt to breed attractive children seen in Naamah, yet more failed methods to bring about paradise through technology and eugenics. Correlating with two methods of getting back to the garden, one which says we will shape the world around us and create the garden, and the other which says we will shape our own bodies to create the garden, which continues to miss the point, that the missing part of paradise is the tree of life, not a lack of method and thus knowledge. Cain's line keeps grasping for knowledge, mimicking the original taking of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. Lamech said to his wives, Adah and Zillah, Hear my voice, you wives of Lamech. Listen to what I say. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain's revenge is sevenfold, then Lamech's is 77-fold. The mark of Cain was that he served as an obvious example to all who saw him that to destroy the trust of others was to curse yourself, not to gain. Now, 5 generations in, the society knows Cain's mark even more so. Lamech declares that the same curse is now greater, and that is true. Now that the society has built itself back up to the point of being able to see what it wants as a collective, anyone who threatens that society threatens to destroy far more than before. And because the breakdown of trust in the city is far more damaging than the breakdown of trust among a small village, the curse of Cain becomes law. Killing Cain, the one who breaks all trust, would bring about the death of trust itself, a terrible curse, but one you could survive. Now the society brings down law, and if you break trust by even striking someone like Lamech, it means death. The 7 of Cain was a curse, but the 77 of Lamech means the biggest of curses, which is simply to be killed. But unlike the 7 curse, which comes from the natural world, an obvious breakdown of the trust that killing someone creates, aka comes from God, the 77 is a law made by humans without God at all, enforced as a necessity but not obvious or natural outside the context of the society itself. Even so, it is a sign of growth as the people now know that trust within the society must be protected, because without trust, everything crumbles. They clearly still remember Cain. But the method they use to rebuild is one of new creation, mimicking the 7 days of creation, and so it's a starting from scratch rather than a continuation. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son, and called his name Seth. For she said, God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him. To Seth also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. At that point in time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord. From here begins the line of Seth, who replaced Abel. We see Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, and finally, Noah. Notice the contrast here. 6 generations that worked just to reach that far, and yet the line of Seth in the same time reached all the way to 8, moving beyond the 7th day and into the 8th, which is the continuation from Genesis 1. Cain's attempt to continue the rebellion set him back and detached him from the Adam and Eve cycle, which must play out in order to reach the garden again. There is no going back, and there is no skipping ahead. And notice that it is at the start of the line of Seth that people begin to call upon the name of the Lord. This shows that this is the line that is properly focused, not on worldly growth and power, but rather on realigning themselves with the will of God, which was always to guide us to paradise as a society. That's what the record of the years lived indicates. Cain's line got no such years because the line was a dead end. There was no need to keep the record. But the line of Seth is the true line and the only one that will continue on even until the coming of Christ. It is the way of life and the way to fix what occurred in the garden. It is the proper way for a society to act when they find themselves in the wilderness. And we seem to be able to see these two paths play out in the meaning of the names themselves. While the exact translations of what the names mean are debated, there seems to be a distinct pattern to the meanings in those names and how the two lines use similar and repeated names but in different places, suggesting the names themselves switch order in the different lineages. Adam means mankind, Seth means appointed, Enosh means mortal, Kenan means sorrow, Mahalalel means the blessed God, Jared means shall come down, Enoch means teaching, Methuselah means his death shall bring, Lamech means the despairing, and Noah means comfort. If we put these all together with a bit of added grammar for clarity, it says mankind is appointed mortal sorrow, the blessed God shall come down teaching, his death shall bring the despairing comfort, which is clearly an outline of exactly what would later occur from the line of Seth with the coming of Christ. And now we do the same for the line of Cain. Adam means mankind, Cain means to get, Enoch means teaching, Irad means fugitive, Mahujael means destroyed by God, Methusael means man of God, and Lamech means despairing. If we put all these together, again with a bit of added grammar, we get mankind to get teaching became a fugitive, destroyed by God. The man of God is despairing, which is a retelling of the fall in the Garden of Eden, where mankind tried to get the teaching, which was the knowledge of good and evil from the fruit, and became a fugitive from the garden, and caused death to enter the world. Now, those who are of God despair at what was lost. That is the story of the line of Cain. Men who keep trying to use their own understanding and method to rebuild the garden, but they can only find despair and their line will not go on. And so, here the Bible warns us how to act if we find ourselves in the part of the Adam and Eve cycle that is the wilderness. It warns of the danger of trying to rebuild things using payment and manipulation of the urges of man. It tells us to stop, like Abel and Seth, and simply go about tending to the animals, renaming them over time and trusting that God will bring the garden back around in due time. It warns us to never remove those who are working to reform the tree of life that is the very heart of the garden itself. It all comes back to the old saying, if you're going through hell, keep going. Don't stop, don't put down roots, don't build a city there, and don't learn any of the methods of hell. Just keep on heading east at all costs. And whatever you do, make sure you know which lineage you are part of. So with this guide on how to emerge out of the wilderness and to move back towards the garden outlined, we should be able to do what we did in the last video and map it onto any society of the past. As in the last video, let's see if these genealogies fit onto America. What we start with is two lines, the line of Cain and the line of Seth. Cain means to get, and that is what his line is focused on, getting worldly things by developing the method to do so. And then we have the line of Seth, which means appointed, and that is the line which has kept itself in its appointed place as dictated by God. So we should see two lineages at the very foundation of America as well. And indeed we do. In the line of Cain and his son Enoch, we find Jamestown being founded in 1607, the first permanent colony in America and one founded as a trade colony set in place to make money. After Spain plundered vast amounts of gold from South America, the Jamestown colonists had their minds set on rushing right into riches and a quick paradise in this new, wild land. With their priorities in the wrong place, they soon found themselves starving, and all authority rapidly broke down as the people devolved into stealing, murder, and even cannibalism to survive. Called the starving time, only 60 of the initial 500 colonists survived. Not unlike the curse of Cain, which kept him alive after he turned on his brother to get what he wanted, martial law was declared in Jamestown in 1610 in order to keep the colony from falling apart entirely. But in contrast, we find the line of Seth and his son Enosh in the more northern colony of Plymouth. Founded after Jamestown in 1620, it was made by those seeking religious freedom, and whose goal was to carve out life in the sight of God. Though not without hardships, their early submission to simple human survival and friendly relations with the natives allowed them to achieve stability much faster than the line of Cain, despite arriving later. And so we see that even from the beginning, these two lines were forming side by side, and as they grew, they began to intermingle and join into one body, both struggling for their own chosen desire. Enoch, which means teaching, began with the line of Cain by finding its stability in human understanding. A method was needed to figure out how to make the new land profitable, and so one was found: slavery. The use of human beings forced to work gave the line of Cain a much-needed boost, and soon the line of Cain was outproducing the line of Seth with its innovative method of simply not caring about human life. On the other hand, Enosh means mortal, and the line of Seth kept God first, with such works as John Winthrop's famous sermon, City on a Hill. But the use of slaves and the increasing fighting with the native population caused the line of Seth much grief. So we see Kenan, whose name means sorrow. The use of human slaves to gain more material wealth led to such things as the 1636 Quaker petition against slavery. But this didn't stop the line of Cain. It was growing in wealth and power within early America, and so we see Irad, whose name means fugitive, and describes the Revolutionary War in which America rose up and broke free of the British yoke, freeing America to spread even more westward. In response, we see Mahalalel, which means the blessed God, who formed the first Great Awakening in the 1730s, a spiritual revival in America from the line of Seth that worked to remind Americans of the higher purpose and that, despite the rapid economic growth, there was more to life than wealth. Even so, America expanded and soon found its limits as the natives in the surrounding British land was threatened. So the powers outside the borders of America pushed back with Mahujael, whose name means destroyed by God. Conflict broke out from outside forces with the War of 1812, which punished American expansion and led to the humiliating burning of the Capitol in D.C. Next came Jared, which means shall come down, and with it the rise of abolitionist and reformist movements that attempted to break down the institution of slavery, reform educational systems, reform the prison system, and outlaw alcohol, pushing for legal solutions to moral problems. In response, we see Methushael, whose name means man of God, and after the intermixing of moral demands into the game of what law and institution should do, the line of Cain became wise and joined in. We see that the source of morals becomes debated, and rather than coming from God, it is proposed that morals can be derived from human understanding, and thus humans could create moral justifications for their own actions. Deism pushes God away and proposes that he is a distant observer that can't be known, and thus human reason must be what guides man. Mormonism appears, offering new explanations for God, and creates a rival religious power contrary to original Christian teachings. And moral and biblical justifications for slavery were formulated to protect the profits of the slave industry. This created a rush for every man to declare himself a man of God, from whom moral principles should come, which, of course, justify his actions and defend against any need to change. An age of self-appointing. Then we see Lamech, which means despairing, and despair followed quickly as Lamech increased law by intermixing moral justifications for imposing more law, but really just to gain more control. The Indian Removal Act being a fair way to treat conquered natives by moving them out of sight and out of mind. Manifest destiny being a justification for America's continued expansion west, and the Civil War being justified as an issue over slavery and not simply to keep the nation unified and powerful. All were examples of law expanding under moral pretense, which led to despair as a result, such as the Trail of Tears and the brother killing brother in the Civil War. And here we see that way back in Jamestown, martial law was enforced to keep order. Thus, the curse of Cain was 7. But all the way down the line to Lamech, we see the same justification of force to keep order that is vastly greater, and so the curse of the Civil War is 7 times 7. Soon after came Enoch of Seth's line. After the damage that intermixing morals and worldly institutions did, it was clear that a different method was needed, and so Enoch was taken away in the Second Great Awakening of the 1840s, in which the Transcendentalist pushed for a rejection of institutional change and instead a focus on oneself and their relationship with God. An abandoning of the political power struggle from before, and a movement more towards the idea that in order to make a society more moral, you simply needed free individuals who would be good people unto themselves. And thus Enoch left the power game entirely, and so he walked with God and was taken. And so the line of Cain reached both its peak and its end. Tubal Cain, which means the continuation of Cain, pushed worldly wealth to its max in the Gilded Age in 1865, and America's innovation and industrial golden era began. The military-industrial complex soon came online, and America began moving into a world superpower. The height of worldly wealth through method, Cain's glory on full display. Later would follow Nama, which means attractiveness, spreading her worldly influence with the sexual revolutions of the 1960s. Jabal and Jubal, who are the priests and artists, perfected the methods of making themselves the authority of where morality came from, with philosophies like existentialism and secular humanism, as well as warped worldly justifications for pleasure like free love and Satanism that permitted pleasure by simply calling it good. Then in the 1890s came Methuselah, whose name means his death shall bring, in which we see the Third Great Awakening and the evangelical revivals. Those who didn't disappear with Enoch made one last push to bring the nation back into proper relationship with God as the focus of life. But it will be the last try, and when the movement slows and dies, it will signal the beginning of the end for the nation. And such an end would begin in the 1960s with Lamech of the line of Seth, whose name means despairing. The line of Seth and all who love godly life fall into despair in the nation. Rebellion against authority comes into fashion. Nietzschean ideas declare that God is dead. Christianity is mocked openly as people trust science instead. Prayer is removed from schools. Abortion becomes the norm. Pornographic material enters every household. Marriage itself breaks down on all levels. Society begins to collapse in on itself as the sacred is profaned and every limit is tested. It all floods in, and nothing is spared as the people are tempted into anything and everything their flesh desires until it kills them. It seems that all hope has been lost and that the society is doomed. But finally, we reach Noah, whose name means rest or comfort, and with him comes the end of the flood and the end to this despair. However, that's a topic for the next video where we will continue on through and talk about how to survive the feminine tyranny. But, all in all, the struggle between these two lineages lines up perfectly with what we see in American history. Hopefully, you now have an idea of how the emergence out of the wilderness occurs and what each of the two lineages are focused on during this re-emergence. If you are wise, you will consider which line you are participating in right now. But thanks for watching the video. In the next one, we'll move right along into the life of Noah and the feminine tyranny that he warns about. If you have any questions or something to add, please leave it in the comments below. And as always, God bless.